Welcome back to my channel. Like, sub, and comment. And today we're going to be talking about KSI's boxing abilities. And is he better or worse than Jake Paul? We're going to be looking at his fight against Joe, his fight against Logan, his 2 fights against Logan, his spars against Gib, his spar against Cal Freezy, and his spar against FaZe Sensei. Pros and cons. Pros: KSI versus Joe Weller. He had a really good jab. He would just constantly be jabbing Joe and not really like going full 100%. And people are like, well, why was Jake able to beat Joe in like 2 rounds or whatever? And I think that's because KSI was told by Vidal, and he even said this, was that he did not want to outpunch himself, and so that's why he was kind of choosing and picking when to fight Joe. The next thing is KSI's good power. I think that's a big thing that everybody loves to say about him, and I think that is very true. I think KSI has really hard power. He has the power behind the punch. If he hits you with the exact right shot at the exact right moment, I'm pretty confident you will not be able to survive that. And so with the Joe fight, he kept distance a lot, and he actually did not get that excited when Joe was hurting, when Joe was like hurt and in the corner. He continued with the jab. He didn't really go like, crazy with the windmills against Joe. He stayed calm and composed, kind of how Jake did against Gib, by continuing to just jab Joe and jab him. And then eventually he did combinations, and he loved to do shots to the chin and to the head, and you'll be seeing these clips and what I'm describing as I'm talking. But yeah. Another good thing is I think that he had really good head movement. There was one particular moment when Joe was landing a lot of shots, and he did manage to land 2 of them, but KSI managed to avoid the other 2. He doesn't break under the pressure, with the lights and the stakes and the fight. He stays very calm and composed. I think his flaws is that his hands were down too much. His defense was not that great. He got hit with a lot of shots that he wouldn't have if his hands were up more. Whenever Joe would kind of come at him, he would just kind of go like this or push him away like this or just kind of take the abuse. And as we know, his defense has improved tremendously since the Joe fight. And again, people were like, well, Joe didn't really fight and he just got hit by KSI. And I'm like, well, that is true. But you cannot admit that KSI was boxing Joe. And I feel like people need to understand is that KSI can box. He can box, but he can also fight and scrap. Like Nate and Gib only know how to fight. They don't know how to box. And, I'm giving you kind of more of a general layman's overview of his fights in this video. If you want like an in-depth analysis that goes into all of the details and also thinks KSI is really good, go to the Wade Concept. He does all kinds of great videos, and he really knows what he's talking about. So I would definitely check out his video on that. And then going into the first Logan Paul fight, I think that KSI does better when he knows how his opponent fights, and so he's kind of figuring out Logan. But I think the big positives was that his stance was a lot different from the Joe fight to the Logan fight. And he did actually, his jab improved a lot more. I think that he obviously had more power than he did in the Joe fight. But he looked worse. I think this was his worst looking fight out of all of the 3 fights he's had. The negatives was that, he threw these haymakery windmill shots. And was it the best way to go about beating Logan? No. But Logan, it was about affecting Logan's mentality. Because Logan doesn't like it when you get rugged and you scrap with him. And KSI realized, I can't box you traditionally. I gotta get down and dirty and in your face. And Logan hated that. He didn't know how to deal with KSI's pressure and with these shots constantly coming at him. He couldn't stay calm and composed, and his mentality just wasn't there. I think the reason why KSI succeeded was because of his cardio and his experience. Another great thing about KSI is, in the Logan fights, his cardio is amazing. He threw these wild punches. A lot of them didn't land, or they didn't land accurately, but he still had the stamina. I think that KSI's 3 biggest assets are cardio, pressure, and power. His cardio is what kept him going. If KSI didn't have the cardio that he had, he would have gassed out, and then Logan probably would have overtaken him, or Joe would have maybe eased up a little bit. And you saw him start to actually do some technical stuff with Logan towards the end, and I do believe if there had been an additional 2 rounds, he would have won that fight, but I think it was too close to call. Logan extends his long arms to make KSI miss, and you understand that, like, if Logan didn't have those long arms and those physical advantages, this fight would have been way easier for KSI, and he probably wouldn't have gone all wild and aggressive. And so I guess the big takeaway from the first Logan Paul fight is that KSI can take big shots, because he took some big shots. And like, the reason why I'm not nervous about KSI going up against Jake is because I know he can take these huge shots and he can continue to come forward and hit you back 10 times harder. And that when he gets hurt, he's able to use his brains and his boxing IQ to get him back to where he was. And that's a difference that Gib and when Gib got hurt, he continued to come forward with no technique. And JJ continued to come forward, but he was being very cautious and conservative. And so he knows when he needs to when he can, like, be more reckless. And with the second fight, pretty much the same pros and cons. His jab was a lot stronger. It was faster. It was quicker. He was more like this than like this. Like, he was very tight with his stance. His defense was the biggest improvement. I think the reason why KSI got hit with so many shots was because his hands were everywhere and his defense wasn't great. But I think because he trained with Jeff Mayweather and he just got better, his defense was so good. I think that was the big positive that I took away from the second Logan Paul fight. You'll see it when I'm talking about. Like, there were moments when I'm like, if you had done that for the whole fight, it would have been way more easier for you and you would have won more decisively. And I think a big thing, and I guess this kind of connects to the Face Sensei fight, is that KSI loves to go for the head. He does, like, with boxing, it's not always about going for the head. You're deconstructing a guy. You're going for the body, and then that will tire him out, and then you'll go for the head. And KSI doesn't really seem to get that concept. Or he does, but he just doesn't like it. Because you see with the Face Sensei spar, when he was hitting Face with body shots and taking his time and deconstructing him, he was doing a lot better. Whereas when KSI was going for the head and the more grandiose shots, he was still winning, kind of, but he was making it harder for himself, and he was getting a bit wild. That KSI only gets really wild and aggressive with Logan when he's going for the head. And the thing is there were a couple key moments when he was just going for that body and doing jabs to the body, and that tires Logan out, and that's boxing smartly. In case I didn't box smartly in the second fight, he boxed off of emotion and recklessness, but he was able to get away with that stuff because Logan had nothing to offer and he didn't know how to counter any of KSI's shots. And he even said that it's hard to fight somebody that doesn't want to fight, and that, you know, if you get too close to Logan, he clinches you. If you get too far away, you'll miss. And that he constantly was running away, and KSI had to initiate everything. And so, and again, that's why I'm saying Logan is a very hard person to fight, and he's such a specific situation, because if Logan actually wanted to fight KSI, and KSI was still doing this wild stuff, then it really wouldn't make any sense. But it makes sense that he would get frustrated by Logan. But there were moments in the fight when he, like, hit him and then went back, and he should have done a lot more of that. And it really wasn't about who had the better technique with the Logan fights. It was who had the bigger heart, who was willing to push themselves to the limit. And that was KSI. I think the reason why he got KO'd and got that uppercut was because his jabs were getting a lot lazier and he wasn't as strong, and he was more tired, and that's because he was throwing all of these shots and tiring himself out. And I think that's a huge issue. And while people will say, well, Logan, choked, both fights were not easy for KSI. There were moments of truth in both of those fights when we thought KSI might be losing. KSI, the fight's over, Logan's won, and he's always managed to come back. It wasn't like those were easy breezy fights for KSI. Those were hard fights, and he learned a lot, and he went a hard 6 rounds. How many YouTubers could? I'm going to tell you, not a lot. And so while Logan, isn't as maybe technically destructive as his brother, for KSI to be for KSI to make both fights be so close is impressive. This man has the mentality to be a fighter. And so much of boxing comes from up here and not so much here. Sensei with the Gib spars, you'll see that Gib and KSI are just at 2 completely different levels. Like, I know KSI said that Gib was his hardest sparring partner, but I think KSI is kind of confused. I think that Gib works KSI a lot, but you see both fights, both spars, KSI is easily outboxing Gib. Gib is fighting and scrapping, and KSI is boxing. Gib's coming at him with constant pressure, wanting to win, and KSI stays calm, he stays composed, he sticks with his game plan, he sticks with the jab, he slips and he hits Gib, and then he slips and he hits him again. And if those were 10-ounce gloves, no headgear, Gib would have gone and knocked out both spars the way Jake knocked out Gib. And if you watch these 2 spars, and you'll see the footage, and I'll leave the links to the videos down below, you will understand that these 2 guys are 2 completely different levels in terms of boxing. And JJ is boxing in these videos. He is not fighting, he is boxing, and he's showing technique, head movement, jabs, composure, and he's staying calm and composed, and he's still coming at you with pressure, but it's tactical thinking. As long as you can admit that KSI can actually box. Like, if you look at KSI's boxing and Jake's boxing, and you still think Jake is better, that's totally fine. But as long as you can admit that KSI is a good boxer by YouTube standards, and that the man can actually box, then I think everyone can get on a much more even level of understanding. Listen, I look at the evidence, I look at the video, and I'm like, this guy can box. You know what I mean? Like, Gib is a scrub. Like, Gib was a scrub to Jake, but I could admit that there were positives I saw of Jake. There were a lot of negatives, but there's a lot of positives. He had a lot of potential. KSI's wild abilities against Logan is not how he fights 99% of the time. The Face Sensei, I think the big flaw was that KSI, once again, went for the head too much and didn't go for the body. He was kind of walking in without the jab. Vidal said, I know you don't like getting hit, but you're going to have to get hit. Broke him down, he would win. So I think but that is a flaw that I think KSI could bring into the Jake fight, is that he's gonna go for the head too much. But you can see with the Face Sensei spar is that he's boxing, he's doing 1-2s, he's doing combinations, he's actually boxing the guy and not just fighting him. The last one I want to hit on is the Cal Freezy spar. A lot of great head movement, a lot almost mimicking Mike Tyson in a way. And what I like to say is, when you watch JJ fight Cal Freezy is actually, well, here's the thing. Cal Freezy is better than all of Jake's opponents. Probably lasts longer and has better technique. But what I will say is that Cal Freezy was like, he was always applying pressure with me. He was constantly coming at me, but he was coming at him with boxing IQ, technique, form, and a plan. And that the version of KSI that we need to beat Jake needs to be the KSI that applies pressure to Cal Freezy, to Face Sensei. His biggest pros are his power, his stamina, and his pressure. And I feel like if KSI can hone all of those things together, he will beat Jake. I think a bad habit is the ducking of the head and the swingy stuff. I'm nervous that stuff could come back to haunt JJ. If he's outboxed and he's getting super frustrated, he will resort to those bad habits. But I think we just haven't seen the full potential of KSI. Whereas with Jake, we've seen a lot of his potential, and like, this is how he actually boxes. If I were to say who is better right now, I'm going to pick Jake, and that's only because he's more active and the skill gap is slowly going up and up, and I do think he's naturally more skilled, and I think the reason why I put him above KSI is because he thinks while also boxing, and I think that I can easily see how Jake beats KSI. I think KSI is also kind of at the level of Jake, but I think that because he doesn't really think and he kind of doesn't really deconstruct people, and he can be a bit reckless, that can hurt him, and I think that's kind of why he's lower against Jake. But again, if KSI was fighting, it'd be completely different. People to keep an open mind to the fact that KSI, your opinion on him isn't probably accurate because you haven't seen his full potential and how he actually fights. Whereas with Jake, we've seen him actually fight. And I think they do a very similar fighting styles, very aggressive, very rough, very in your face. Whenever they do fight, it won't be a one-sided match because KSI and Jake, they don't go down. You know, the only way to beat these guys is if you put them on a stretcher. All I gotta say on it, like, sub, and comment. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.